Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Comics Over Time podcast. My name is Dwayne. With me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, we've got something exciting to talk about tonight.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. We've been leading up towards this for quite a long time, and it was nice getting a chance to get back in and seeing some live action Daredevil again. It's been a while. Been too long.
It has. So since February 1st of last year, we've been reading through the comic book history of Daredevil in preparation for this new Disney Plus TV show, not knowing when or even if it would ever actually premiere. After a number of changes to staff, a lot of fan outrage, rewrites, and reshoots, Daredevil Born Again finally debuted this week with its first 2 episodes of its 9-episode season 1, with its second season already beginning filming. We have both seen it and now want to talk to each other and with you about what we saw. But before we start, I need you to keep in mind that this is going to be very much a spoiler-filled discussion. If you have not seen Daredevil Born Again episodes 1 or 2, you should, and you don't want any of this spoiled. Trust me, you do not want any of this spoiled. Pause right here, don't listen any further, and come back to us once you've seen the episodes, and then continue on with this discussion. Okay, Dan, we had 2 episodes that debuted on March 4th, Heaven's Half Hour and Optics. Both of them have been rated very highly on IMDB. Currently, it is 8.8 for Heaven's Half Hour. The first episode, 8.7 for Optics. I've been looking at reviews online throughout the day. Most of them seem to be very positive with regards to the show. Thinking back to some of the more recent MCU TV shows that have premiered on Disney Plus, they have definitely not been as positive as some of the reviews that I've seen so far. What did you, just overall, without going into any specifics, just overall impressions, are you happy with the first almost 2 hours of Daredevil that we've seen?
I think it was entertaining, and I enjoyed the fact that they brought, some of the band back together. I love a lot of the actors and things like that. As we move along, I think I'm going to have a few bullet points in terms of things that bother me, that maybe, and part of this is colored, by the way, that over the last couple days leading up towards this one, I rewatched all of season 3 of the Netflix show. And so I got 13 episodes of the Netflix show and then 2 episodes of this. And I will say that it's not a fair comparison, because season 3 of the Netflix show is one freaking spectacular piece of television. And so
I did not have that same reference. I did watch about a 25-minute catch up on Daredevil ahead of the premiere that IGN had done, that I thought was pretty well encompassing, talking through the 3 seasons of the Netflix show, touched on all the other shows in which Matt Murdock was a part of, whether it be on the Netflix side, The Defenders, or what have you, or where he's shown up, since then, with the reappearance in Spider-Man, and then in She-Hulk, and then also talking a lot about Wilson Fisk as well, and then the show Echo and all that. So I did not have that same frame of reference. It still has been many years since I last watched the Daredevil run, but I really, really enjoyed it. It felt like putting on an old pair of gloves and it just feeling great, because we got the two main people back. We got some other people back. We got some new people, and it was really good, and it was shocking too. And I think
Mhm.
I think I shouldn't say anything more until we get to our discussion topics.
All right. Sounds good. I think we're going to have an interesting question about that starting out because you say that the two main people are back. I think that one of the three main people is back. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we have a difference in perception on some of this. So we'll wander
Yes.
into it. Shall we begin?
I think I know where you're going with that. All right. So let's talk briefly about the first episode here. Just kind of giving you a little bit of a recap. Disney, as always, has a blurb talking about what the episode's going to be about before you jump in. The Disney blurb for episode 1, Heaven's Half Hour, is Matt Murdock gives up the mask. Wilson Fisk has his sights set on to new heights.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I suppose that's true.
Both of those things do happen. Yes,
yeah,
there are things missing from that description. So
yeah,
essentially, what happens is we have a sort of a 1 year later thing, where the very beginning we have an inciting incident, and then a year happens, and that's when we see Matt trying to make these changes and stuff. I do actually have, if you would, if those of you, and I know that my history professors would be angry at me, but we do have a decent write-up that was done out on the Wikipedia article for these. That's just a summary of episode 1. I think maybe it would be a good place to start.
All
so,
right, let's go.
You ready for it?
Yes.
While out celebrating their associate Cherry's retirement at Josie's Bar, Matt Murdock, Foggy Nelson, and Karen Page, as well as the other patrons, are attacked by Benjamin Dex Poindexter, now an assassin. Foggy is severely injured in the attack and dies in Karen's arms, causing an enraged Matt, as the masked vigilante Daredevil, to drop Dex off a roof. Shortly after, Cherry arrives on the roof and discovers Matt's secret identity. A year later, Matt, having retired as Daredevil, has partnered with former District Attorney Kristen McDuffie. Karen has moved to San Francisco, while Dex is given a life sentence for his crimes. Kristen sets Matt up on a date with therapist Heather Glenn, and the two hit it off. After gaining enough signatures and with his wife Vanessa's support, Wilson Fisk decides to run for mayor of New York City, launching an anti-vigilantism campaign. In a private chat, Fisk assures Matt he was not at a diner, by the way. They're just hanging out, having pancakes at a diner or something. Fisk assures Matt he was not involved in Foggy's murder, as he kept his promise of not hurting Matt's friends. And Matt warns Fisk that he will retaliate if Fisk steps out of line. Fisk responds by warning there will be consequences if Matt restarts his activities as Daredevil. On a second date with Heather, Matt then learns that Fisk has won the election. While celebrating his victory, Fisk reveals to Vanessa he learned she cheated on him. So there we go.
That's a pretty good
I actually thought it was pretty
one.
decent. That's about the length of the ones we used to do for the Moon Knight synopsises. The thing that I think is most interesting about this is in that entire sort of blurb, other than just knowing who Matt Murdock and some of the other main characters are, the only thing you really need to know is that Fisk and Murdock essentially have an agreement. That's one of the very few things that comes from the series that's like you need to know this kind of thing, is that essentially at the end of season 3, Fisk is like, I'm going to kill everybody you know. And Murdock's like, no, you're not, because as soon as you do, I'm going to take down your wife, and I know how much she means to you. And so they actually shake hands with this sort of, Viper's agreement. they're both going to kill the other one if they need to.
Mutually assured destruction agreement.
Correct.
There, I think.
Yep. That's exactly what it is. But outside of that, I think what shocks me is how much of a break this is from the Netflix series. They brought back the characters, but the actual sort of storyline is very much revised, it seems, because at the end of season 3, Fisk is going to prison and everything's sort of, kind of looking up for Murdock and Nelson and Page, and then it all is completely upside down as of season 1 now. You didn't feel that way necessarily. But two things. You haven't watched the Daredevil series recently.
Right.
So I do think I might have made a mistake doing that. That's like, I don't know, going to your favorite restaurant and having the thing you love most before going and trying out a new restaurant. And then suddenly it's like, this isn't as good as the best restaurant that I was just at a couple hours ago. But I will now stop talking about how much I love Daredevil season 3, and we'll just concentrate on this one instead. So,
yeah, we're not adjudicating whether or not the Netflix show was a good show or not, because I think we both were in very much agreement that show was fabulous. It was great. It was one of the best things from a comic book adaptation we've ever seen. And yep. I think we were both hoping that we would get anything close to that. And so my expectation level going into this was that it wasn't going to be the Netflix show, but my hope was that it was going to be a Disney show that was more like the Netflix show than any other MCU TV show that we've seen so far. And from that standpoint, I think the show, these first 2 episodes hit it out of the park, and I think that's
I would say it succeeds at that.
Yep. So many people have liked what they've seen so far.
Yep.
But because a lot of our topics, I think, are going to kind of branch through both episodes. Why don't we do a little synopsis or talk about the blurbs and do a little recap on episode 2, Optics, and then we'll jump in and talk about our topics.
All right, so for episode 2, we have our always helpful Disney blurb. Matt Murdock gets a new client who's more than he claims to be. Fisk learns the power of optics. So,
yep, that is
super mysterious,
as vague and unhelpful as the episode 1 blurb was. So,
let's see if maybe
factual statements, but not actually all that useful.
Yeah. It's like designed by a lawyer. So for this episode 2, it's called Optics. It was directed by Michael Cuesta. The first episode was actually directed by Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson, by the way. In it, Matt actually at the beginning decides to represent Hector Ayala, who assaulted a dirty cop who was trying to help Nicky Torres before the cop was accidentally killed by a train. And in actual fact, I would say that's even incorrect the way they put it, because he didn't necessarily assault him. The 2 cops were assaulting someone. He sort of intervened. One of the cops ended up sort of trying to punch him and instead wandered past and fell into a train.
He tripped over his buddy who was on the ground and went headlong onto the subway tracks as a train was going by.
Yep. So that was unfortunate for him. With Sherry's help, Matt actually discovers that Hector is the vigilante White Tiger who took justice into his own hands after Daredevil's disappearance. While attempting to improve his optics in the first days of his office, Fisk learns from Ben Urich's niece, young journalist Bibi, that the New York Police Department Commissioner Gallo is poised to resign in protest of poor conditions. Fisk threatens Gallo's family to force him back into office, and to deal with the pressures of the press, he and Vanessa start attending couples therapy with Heather as their therapist. Matt tracks down Torres and helps him escape by fighting off the corrupt cops. So, there's not even a mention of the manhole cover getting fixed.
But come on. Fighting off and basically killing the two cops.
He has done them damage. He definitely did them damage. So, yeah, and I think the main thing about this is, the other thing we'll talk about is this Nicky Torres was essentially, was in hiding, and the bad cops had found him, and then Murdock got there just before, and obviously they then tried to go through him, and that didn't go very well for them. So, but yeah, so that's kind of where we're at this point. Is Fisk is in therapy, and Matt Murdock has sort of let the dog back out after attempting to be a more kinder, gentler citizen for the last year after what had happened to Foggy.
That was a pretty good synopsis, recap of what happened in episode 2. So we got like almost 2 hours. First episode was 58 minutes. I think the second episode was 49 minutes. And so we got almost 2 hours, and a lot happens in 2 hours. Actually.
I did not expect them to be this long. Most of the Netflix shows were close to this length, but the Disney Plus generally, it seems like they end up being 35 minutes, 40 minutes, something like this.
Less than 45, it feels like in most cases.
And especially with the fact there's going to be 10 episodes, 9 episodes, whatever. This is going to be a much longer series if this continues than a lot of the recent ones have been, which that's awesome. We're good with that.
I'm not complaining by any stretch of the imagination. All right, so let's jump in and let's talk about some of our discussion topics. Dan, what is your first thing you want to talk about?
The first thing I think was, to me, just the first thing was that this felt very disjointed and almost intentionally disjointed from the Netflix show, both in terms of what we get from the cast, how some of the sort of the lighting and things are done, and then also in terms of just this sort of the status quo for the characters as we head into this. There's a bunch of new characters. I feel a little bit like I've had the rug pulled out in terms of everybody was up in arms when Foggy and Karen were being recast or were being taken out of the show. And so they're like, okay, we've heard you, internet and Daredevil fans. We're going to bring back the original Foggy and Karen. And then we get them for what? 5 minutes, and one's dead and the other is sent to San Francisco.
Yeah, no, that was definitely one of the things I want to talk about was the new support group. We've seen this in the comics before, right? Not specifically Daredevil, but we've seen like our main character get relocated or get a new support system around them because a new writer comes in or whatever, and suddenly we just have a new set of characters that we have to deal with and just have to, I guess, kind of like. And I definitely am sad that we didn't get more of Foggy and Karen. I was expecting, based on the fact that they were, because of the outrage, brought back in, but I was not expecting that, at least so far we got a few minutes in episode 1 before the Foggy's time, entirely before the opening credits of episode 1, actually. Karen a little bit after the credits in episode 1, and then they're both gone for episode 2.
Yeah, and I mean it's obviously the show's called Daredevil, but during season 3 we had almost an entire episode that was just sort of a backstory for Karen, and Foggy has been a constant part of sort of Daredevil for heaven knows how long. We have the same thing in Moon Knight. When Jed McKay took over and he got rid of sort of the supporting cast, we lost kind of the people who were there before, and he brought in the Midnight Mansion and that new crew, and that worked out great. But I mean, I think right now we are being asked to sort of take on Sherry and Kirsten and sort of accept that they're going to be the confidants that are going to sort of entertain us.
To the point of the new supporting cast, I'm surprised they did that, but the show's called Born Again. So I think they kind of subliminally sort of told us that there could be cast changes and that there could be some turnover on this. I think the new partner in Kirsten McDuffie, the former assistant district attorney that comes over and becomes kind of a partner with Matt Murdock, she seems nice. She set him up with a woman she knows, Heather Glenn. By the way, Heather Glenn love interest for Matt Murdock. Not not a new love interest if you remember volume 1 of the comics. And Heather Glenn was actually in the Ben Affleck movie Daredevil. She was at a voicemail that he was listening to. She was breaking up with him via voicemail because he was never around for her.
And I believe you are on record that she was your least favorite supporting character of the original Volume 1 run of Daredevil.
Yes, she was. But this is a much different Heather Glenn, though. This Heather Glenn is like a therapist. She's writing a book. By the way, the book is called Live Without Fear. I love that name, off of The Man Without Fear, of course. And like, she's not just this like, the thing about Heather Glenn in the comics is she seems like she's like maybe 21 and like is kind of flighty and just sort of shows up and was like, I used to live here. I'm going to come in and, you know, let's be friends, and then friends with benefits, and then let's be boyfriend and girlfriend, all in the span of about 3 books.
Yep. Yeah, it was a mess. That character was a mess. And then, of course, just a note, Kirsten McDuffie is not an invented character either. She was actually in the 2011 Daredevil run by Mark Waid and Paulo Rivera. So she's an existing character as well. So it's not like somebody we haven't seen before.
Now, I think actually Detective Cherry is the character I find, or I think I'm most interested in after these first 2 episodes. He is essentially, he's a retired detective, right? Who now works as like a private investigator for Murdock and his team. He is basically doing what Misty Knight was doing for Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson in the comics. They hired Misty Knight to be this like private investigator to go like look for things and investigate things and dig up dirt on things and that sort of thing. And that's exactly what this former Detective Cherry is. But one key thing is that Cherry knows who Matt Murdock was, because during that opening with Foggy getting killed, he ends up going to the roof after Foggy dies, and Matt Murdock throws Bullseye Benjamin Poindexter from the roof. He actually takes off his mask, and so the retiring detective actually sees that Matt Murdock and Daredevil are one and the same.
Yep. So I guess that's our new cast of characters. Sounds like you're relatively satisfied with the new Rogues Gallery as far as his new characters.
Yeah, they're not as endeared to me as Foggy and Karen were, because I had much more time with them and that. But for 2 episodes, yeah, I'm pretty happy with the new support system that Matt Murdock has in this.
Yeah, I will essentially sort of remain open-minded. I will note that part of my problem is that Eldon Henson is an absolutely perfect Foggy Nelson. Like,
he is.
Ever since the first time I saw him, I'm like, good God, that literally is Foggy come to life. And Foggy has always low-key been one of my favorite characters in Daredevil. So I'm angry. And also just the fact that, they didn't really earn any of the emotion they're trying to get out of us. It's a bunch of new creators who step in, essentially just lop off a character that for 3 seasons other people built up value and sort of equity in, and then just pretend it's good story writing. And I am not a fan of that sort of thing. If you hadn't watched the first 3 Daredevil series, Foggy's death doesn't mean anything to you.
No, definitely not. They're obviously banking on the fact that you have watched the first 3 seasons and that you love Foggy Nelson, so that this has that sort of emotional tie to it.
Yeah, which means they're just ripping off other creators' work and then harvesting. They're They're like what are those investment bankers called? The venture capitalists. They're venture capitalists of story at this point.
Yes.
They're coming in and just sort of raising it for value.
We see this all the time in comics, Dan. You've taught me to sort of just, this
I hate
happens.
it, but yes, you're right. All right, let's move on. What is your first thing you wanted to talk about? Like one of your points on these?
So my first is a line is crossed, and it is violence. There is not that much violence in these first two episodes, and in fact, it basically is a sandwich of violence. We have violence at the beginning of the first episode. We have violence at the beginning of the second episode, and then we have violence at the end of the second episode. It is a violence sandwich with a lot of character development in between.
I absolutely love that. You're completely correct.
Yes, but here's the thing. So we were told before Moon Knight that this was going to be a more adult, more graphic, more violent show, and then they didn't show really any violence. I feel like they actually showed violence here. There is that opening scene is violent. Like, it is maybe not quite as on par with Netflix, but it is well beyond anything I think, have ever seen in the MCU before now. Like, it is knock down, drag out, the whole fight in the bar, and they're going through the hallway and up the stairs. Bullseye is killing people just indiscriminately. He gets 11 murder charges because of this fight and things that are going on here. And you get to the roof, and it is just amazing to me. And then the line is crossed insofar as Daredevil breaks that rule that he has about not killing, because he literally, after Foggy dies, he hears the heartbeat stop. He throws Bullseye from the roof of Josie's bar onto the cement road with every intention of killing him.
Yes. It
is, and that's why he then just decides he's not going to be Daredevil anymore. He doesn't seem like he can control it. There's a scene actually in season 3 where Karen and Foggy are talking about Daredevil and his no-kill rule, and that absolutely. He just, as a Catholic, would not be able to handle looking at the guilt of it. Mm-hmm. And the guilt that he would have about killing. And so if he ever did, he would just they would just lose him. And then in the very opening minutes of this new series, he basically does that. And then the end of episode 2, when the police officers are coming in there, I mean, I have no idea how those 2 police officers would still be alive after that altercation. Like, the one guy has a broken neck at the very least. And, there wasn't a lot of violence, but the violence they showed, I think, actually was more violent than anything we've seen.
To me, they were very different too. The first scene was what I would call adolescent violence. It was a fight scene where, yes, people were just murdered indiscriminately. There was no real, other than the fact you knew Foggy and you knew he was dying, and there was that shock. It was just sort of almost like a John Wick type of violence, where you didn't know or care who any of these people were. They were just, straw dolls getting, I don't know, sporks or whatever thrown into them by Bullseye as he kind of terrorized through things. That final fight scene, that felt like Daredevil to me. I think that was the first time where I'm like, okay, this is, because Murdock tries to hold it in and the other guys keep pushing, and there's that very
you don't want to do this.
Yep. There's an actual connection and a synergy between them where you know that this fight is going to be very painful. And he tries to resist and he tries to resist. And then when he lets go, he just wrecks them. And it's well filmed. It's well done. I was really pleased with the way they handled that. The first one, to be quite frank, even like some of the Daredevil sort of leaping through the sky like he's some sort of Batman or whatever, it looked kind of CGI-ish almost to me. And I was worried after watching the first few minutes. Like, I think this could be pretty sketchy. And then it got much better. I liked the White Tiger fight scene, was well choreographed. One thing actually that's different from the previous Daredevils that I do sort of like in some ways is that it's actually lit so you can see what's going on once in a while. So I don't know if you remember the original Daredevil series.
They're very dark. Like it was almost pitch black.
Yeah, like they're very noir and it's very moody, but it was really hard to see what was going on sometimes. And they have, and that was intentional. You know, it had a very old school, like black and white movie sort of sketchiness to it that really felt dirty and grimy and sort of Hell's Kitchen-y, right? So I love that vibe, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't maybe just prefer the new one to be like that still, but it is still nice being able to see what's going on once in a while, I have to admit. So that's been kind of different as well.
So I didn't mind it. It didn't look that great. Him kind of jettisoning up to the roof and then running across the roof, and then like it reminded me of some of those comic book panels that we see, specifically like the title page where you see him just flying through the air because the Billy Club is slinging him through the air and all this, and it very much reminded me of those. And I love the fact that I don't remember seeing that in the original Netflix series. I don't remember them doing that much
the original Netflix series did not look like a comic book.
Right.
It looked like a taxi driver type of just New York vigilante kind of thing. It was people getting their heads beaten in with car doors and stuff like this. It was not about that sort of stylized violence. I think that's the best way to put it, is that the first scene of episode 1 was a sort of stylized violence. And Daredevil to me is not about that. It's about brutality.
It's 90s comic book violence is what it is.
Yeah. Yep.
They adapted to the small screen.
So, yeah. So, but I mean, as far as it goes, I think that they did a nice job sort of bringing some things back as it went on. Obviously, they're starting to get into gear and this is a long story. I believe that from what I've heard, we are even going to essentially have season 1 was originally planned out to be twice as long as it is. So it's very possible that season 1 and 2 are actually one large story.
Big story, yeah.
So it might take a little while to get going.
I will be disappointed because unlike the comic books, I can't just keep going to the next one and then.
No, you will not be able to.
All right. Do you have another point that you want to bring up, Dan?
I've kind of talked about a number of the things. I think you kind of hit on a number of the things that I really wanted to. I will note that the music so far has sort of thrown me off a little bit. Most of the Daredevil music from seasons 1 through 3, I would describe as like angry, ominous violins, right? They were like, kind of stuff, right? And now they've got almost like pop songs or,
Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and
like
things
like music that just is not necessarily what I'm used to in terms of when I think about Daredevil. I think that screechy sort of tonal music that they used in the previous Daredevil episodes, I kind of miss a little bit.
But it fits the way the MCU typically scores their TV and movies.
Correct.
So I mean, it's not out of place when you think about it like that. But yes, out of place compared to the previous iteration of Daredevil.
And really, I mean, I know that it's unfair maybe to compare, but it's very difficult not to make some of these comparisons because it's not like Disney didn't make a choice here. You know, they had a fantastic show and they murdered it, and then they waited about 7 years, and then they made another show using mostly the exact same people. So I think that comparing it to what we had before is legitimate. It's also crazy to think this would be one point for you. Do any of the actors look like they're 10 years older than they were during
No,
Daredevil episode 1?
no, they don't. What the hell?
Because it was 2015 that like literally, I think it was 9 years and 11 months ago that season 1 debuted on Netflix. And Charlie Cox looks like he's maybe 3 months older. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Vincent D'Onofrio does look smaller now than he did during the Netflix run. And in fact, there's a comment about that Daredevil makes when they sit, or Murdock makes when they're sitting down at the in the diner. He's like, you have a lighter footstep, he said. You've lost some weight, and that.
Yep.
And so it was, he even speaks to it. Yet he still looks every bit as foreboding. Like when he stepped out, and when that shutter door opens and he steps out for the very first time, and and says Vanessa, and then like basically ends the meeting with the 5 families, and they're just like, yeah, you all talk, we're gonna go.
Yep. Vanessa looks the same. Karen looks the same. Foggy had a beard. That was the big change. 10 years. 10 years put a beard on him, evidently. But yeah, so that was kind of weird. I have to admit. But how about you? What would be another thing that we haven't talked about that you wanted to note?
I have Devil's Reign, Kingpin becoming mayor. I mean, it was hinted at in the end of the Echo TV series. He's on the plane after seeing Maya Lopez and sees that the mayoral race doesn't have a clear candidate. And this comes from the 2022 big crossover event in the comics, Devil's Reign. Fisk becomes mayor on a very, very similar anti-vigilante message. And I was waiting for the Powers Act to get enacted, where he basically outlaws all vigilantes and then starts incarcerating them. And he didn't quite go that far yet, but it definitely felt like we're very much heading down that road. And the other thing is it's interesting because you think about the Kingpin and like his power and his ability to manipulate people on that. It's like that's what he does as this crime boss, but he basically uses the same skills then once he becomes mayor, because he ends up blackmailing the police commissioner to stay on and force him into no pay increase, no overtimes, no cadet class. And it's amazing to me. He's him and Vanessa are now taking couples therapy with Heather Glenn, the girlfriend of Matt Murdock, and that's going to come to be useful to him as well at some point. So it was just amazing to me, and it also felt a little too real given the current events in the world. And it's just sort of like I even saw something that basically said Matt Murdock's taking on Trump as something on the internet, and I'm just like, oh goodness.
Well, and it was kind of similar even in the books we were reading with Bendis a little while ago, that idea that Daredevil at a certain point is almost like realized that the Kingpin serves this role within the New York environment, the ecosystem of the city. You have to have someone who's controlling certain things. And if the city won't do it, if the politics won't do it, then someone else is going to fill that void. And so he ends up trying to take over the Kingpin's role, essentially, to fill that void once he's decapitated the Kingpin as the leader. But what the Kingpin's really doing here is he's just taking it to the house, essentially, and saying, look, instead of running the city from the shadows, he's going to run the city from City Hall.
Oh.
And he's going to use all the same corrupt methods. He's going to be just as brutal. Everything he does is just as illegal. It's just that now he's doing it from the office.
He gets to do it more out in the open, actually. And he gets support doing it, too.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The issue 595 is where Mayor Fisk started of the Daredevil run, which is from the Charles Soule run. That's one of the reasons people were talking about the Soule run being one that's going to be a big factor here. And it's interesting because like the Times Square billboards with Fisk's face on them and the like, that literally is like a panel reproduced out of the issue where he gets elected. So they did some cool visual homages to the actual comic books as well. And so we will get to those, probably in about 6 or 7 years in our comic studies. We still got a ways to go.
What are you talking about? We're not that far. We don't have that.
We're working on 2004, and I think those are like 2015 or 16 books. So it's going to be a few weeks or months.
I mean, it's going to be,
not 7 real years. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So, I thought you were saying real years, and I'm like,
no.
We're moving at a slightly faster pace than that.
We are moving faster than that. But yeah, this is an interesting one, and it is really timely, and it's frustrating. And again, it's one of those things where when it happened, I always hated these Mayor Fisk or President Luthor things because they seemed absurd. Because what kind of country would elect an actual criminal to higher office? And well, I stand corrected, so that's the way it goes. But it is interesting.
Yeah. So you have a note here about Disney ads. You have an ad version of Disney Plus?
We resubscribed. I'd gotten rid of Disney Plus because there wasn't anything really that we needed now. And we've got so many subscription services that maintaining all of them is just ridiculous.
Right.
So I had taken time off, and when I resubscribed, I just took the $10 a month one or whatever. And Disney with ads is absolutely horrible.
Oh,
There are all of these ads. Most of them are for male medical products and things like this, and various other sorts of pharmaceuticals. And you're watching a Daredevil or a show that's got kind of dark tones, and then boom, this big bright ad. And I just don't watch television with ads anymore. So it's very disconcerting that every 5 minutes you're like dropped out of the show. And so yeah, if any of you have Disney with ads, man, I feel for you. I
feel sorry for you as well. I actually have an ad-free version, so I did not have to deal with that, thankfully.
We always did before when we had it, but I'm like, I only need it for Daredevil. I'll just watch the ads, and I am regretting my choices. Or I'm regretting Disney's choices of sticking a bunch of ads into a service that I've already paid for. So,
right.
There you go.
So I wanted to talk about the White Tiger storyline, because this is we are right around the time of that actual Hector Ayala storyline in the comics, the Trial of the Century. And I knew the White Tiger was going to be in this. We'd seen some shots of him during some of the trailers and stuff. But man, seeing that was a rough story to read in the comics, and they actually did a really good job of adapting it to live action. It felt just as difficult to watch here in episode 2 as it did reading it in the comics. And man, I hope it doesn't turn out the same way. I totally expected that it will, but good Lord.
It is different too, though, because in the comics, he interrupts a robbery.
Yes.
And then one of the cops gets shot by somebody else
by
when
one
they
of the
come
robbers.
in.
Yeah.
And it's a mistaken identity thing. So in that case, the cops are not bad cops.
Yes.
Whereas in this story, the two cops are obviously doing something they should not be. And he interrupts them, and then the fight occurs. So it is going to be different in terms of the previous, the Bendis storyline is one of, how do they prove that he was just there and ended up holding a television when he shouldn't have been when he was trying to break it up, as opposed to now proving that the cops are trying to lie about something and that something else was going on. So,
yeah,
but I think it's looking good.
Yeah, and in the TV show, they're not going to be talking, presumably, in the trial about the fact that he's a superhero because Matt Murdock got it thrown out. He's not allowed to. They're not allowed to bring it up, and so yeah, it just. Oh man, it was quite something to actually see it. And then I don't know if you saw at the beginning of the second episode, we had a in loving memory of an actor, Kumar De Los Reyes, and that is actually the White Tiger Hector Ayala character. That actor actually passed away Christmas Eve 2023 due to cancer. And so these scenes were shot a while ago that were in this second episode. So we talked about there having to be rewrites and reshoots. This was some of the early on footage that actually got made and ended up staying in the series.
And that is just crazy that this is happening as often as it is in some of these, that you got these guys just kind of passing away young like this. That's tragic and also really kind of crazy to think that he died that long ago and that the series has taken that long to come out. And, I mean, it's interesting because it throws into a little bit of perspective too, just all of the problems this thing's had developmentally,
right.
That we had essentially, it started out with one set of producers and one set of writers, and they kind of moved off and were replaced, and they shot some things and then started over. So, it's possible that some of these scenes came in from a series that otherwise looked much different. So yeah. I guess one other sort of semi-last question. Were there any points where you felt that disconnect, where you're like, this is a bunch of different hands in the pie, or did it feel pretty organic to you?
It felt pretty organic to me, and I watched actually both episodes twice in their entirety, and I was sort of the second watch, I was sort of kind of looking for threads to pull on, sort of things that didn't seem like they made sense or were out of place, and I didn't really see anything. It felt like they had done a really good job of seamlessly sort of going from one, this story seemingly was one story. They had managed to make it all cohesive and it works.
I would agree. I think that for what it is, sometimes I can be a little negative Nelly when it comes to adaptations of things I love. But for what they did, I think it all made sense. It's a nice start. Obviously, we're 2 episodes into a long season, so things could change. But I would say this is a pretty good beginning, with the exception that I'm furious about Foggy. And
yes.
and they're going to have to do some pretty damn good work to make me forgive them for the fact that somehow they needed to kill Foggy to make this work,
No.
Give him send him off on a cruise if you need to. I don't care, but permanently removing him off the board, I think, is a mistake.
Did you like the way that they handled his other senses sort of heightened, and like how he was hearing conversations and things like that throughout
Mhm.
all this, because I did actually think that was kind of interesting. We saw very early on in the bar they kind of highlighted his ear. I don't know if it was like a lens flare or what, but it
Yep.
basically kind of focused on his ear and kind of highlighted it, and then all of a sudden we heard Foggy
Yep.
talking to Benny on the phone, and then like they did a really good job of sort of like making you understand that, here were these other senses that were heightened, and so this is how he knows these things are going on, and they did a really good job specifically with sound. I feel like.
No, I would agree. And even when he was tracking sort of this one guy, the one of the bad cops, and essentially was just following, and he could tell his footfall from everybody else. And I also found it interesting that he got so focused on that footfall and following that sound, he just about got run over by a cab because he forgot
Yes.
about all of the other stuff around him. Just like somebody who's really focused on looking at one thing, tunnel visions a little bit, and forgets to look for other things. So
Right.
it also sort of shows you some of the dangers of the way he, of letting his senses hone in too much on one thing instead of having them looking out for everything. But yeah, I would agree, and I don't know that they did it in the same way before. So that is kind of a cool way of making it happen.
I I liked the fact that I like the fact that they did that, because it reminds you that these are his powers, and whether or not he is Daredevil, he still has these powers. He still has these tools at his disposal, so he can be Daredevil without actually being in the costume.
Mhm.
Like, that fight scene at the end, he's not in the Daredevil costume. He is just a guy in a suit who is beating the living crap out of those police officers.
He's not in the suit hardly at all during these episodes. Other than
Oh,
that first scene for a little while, we don't see him as Daredevil for the next, I don't know, 70, 80, 90 minutes, something like that.
you have what do you think the over under is for when we're going to see Matt Murdock in the Daredevil suit again? Do you think we'll see it in season or in episode 3, or will it be later in the season than that?
If it's episode 3, I would bet it's the final scene of episode 3. Like he takes a bunch of stuff and eventually just gets tired of it, and then he suits up and gets ready to go at the end of 3 or something like that. I think it'll be at the end of one of the next 2 episodes. He will,
It's going to be like that, like the Moon Knight reveal
you know,
right at the end sort of scenario.
I would think so. That sounds like probably the way they'll play it. So, but yeah, it was interesting. So, so what was for you the most satisfying comic book moment? Like as a person who's read 400 and some Daredevil books, what was the moment that was most satisfying for you in these first 2 episodes?
I don't
Yeah.
know. So the thing is, we've been reading the Brian Michael Bendis books, and this felt like the Brian Michael Bendis books in a TV show. Like I think the moment that stands out to me in the first 2 episodes, and they even ruined it in the trailer, yet I still loved it seeing it in the moment, was the two of them sitting in the diner talking to each other, and Vince and Wilson Fisk says, "It's not entirely unpleasant to see you again." And you just see the sort of awkward, strained
Mhm.
relationship that they have, yet they are there and they're sitting there and they're talking. And he's like, "You got kids?" "No, I tried to mentor someone." And then he's like, "Did she try and shoot you in the face?"
Yep, exactly. I
And
will
so
say
it's
that was my favorite moment. Like, not my favorite comic moment, but I was going to note that is my favorite actual scene, I think, is the two of them sitting in the diner. And you're
yeah.
very right. That is 100% a Brian Michael Bendis kind of thing to do. You just have like
Yes.
4 pages of panels, all of the two of them just sitting there looking at each other, basically with word balloons. That would be
talking about Becky's Diner, how they both miss Becky's Diner, which is a callback to those opening moments of episode 1. Yeah. So there isn't a comic book moment that stands out to me from these first 2 episodes, but there is just a lot of references and moments that definitely felt like the current Brian Michael Bendis Volume 2 Daredevil run that we've been reading and that we'll be continuing to read once we pick that up again, in a few weeks. That just I'm intrigued and I'm very excited for next Tuesday already to get to our next episode.
There you go.
I think it's actually going to be like episode 4. If I was to guess, I think it's going to be episode 4 when we see Matt Murdock back in the Daredevil suit. I don't think it's going to be quite yet.
All right.
I think we've covered all of our discussion topics. I think this was a pretty good discussion overall. I think we both liked it for what it is. I think we're both excited about next week's episode. We don't have a trailer or anything to like reference or pick apart yet, like we had all those trailers leading up to the 2-episode premiere this week. But I'm really like, where do you go from here? He just basically killed 2 cops in some other guy's apartment. And I
don't think he killed them. I think he just
I think he killed him.
He didn't kill them. They're not making him a multiple cop killer in episode 2. I'm assuming they're both going to need surgery of some sort, but that's the farthest I'll go.
They're well, at least the one guy is going to need like the bullseye surgery and get the get the special kind of adamantium, but not because we don't own the rights to it. That he got at the end of season 3 of Netflix.
They do now, though.
Yep. They do now. So now they could get it.
So, but yeah. So I do have one incendiary note about the first 2 episodes, by the way, that I'd like your comment on.
Okay.
I think this feels more like a WB Arrowverse show right now than a Netflix Defenderverse show.
I've never actually seen any of the Arrowverse, so I have no frame of reference. I will tell you that like I said, I feel like it is not a Netflix show. I feel like it's a Disney show trying to be a Netflix show, or as much as they're willing to try and be a Netflix show, this is what we get.
The WB shows were fun, and the Arrow show is actually very similar to one of these ground level types of shows, and it was pretty violent for what it did and everything else. But it had the whole thing sort of just, I don't know, young adultified, if that's the best way to put it. And I feel almost like that's what's happened here. And I'm not against that. I loved the Arrow first shows. The first 2-3 seasons of Arrow were a ton of fun, but they're very different. I think this is a more direct line successor to a new season of Arrow than a new season of Daredevil.
Yes.
You not having watched them means that we cannot fight on this.
I don't have a way to argue. All I could say is this feels more adult to me than most of the MCU TV shows. Not like adult in so much as it not being like some of the other shows were complex and had thought-provoking parts to them. I think there's just like adult from the idea of like violence and corruptness and different things like this that I feel like it was like the Marvel Knights version of Daredevil versus the previous old newsstand Daredevil.
100%. I would say that's That is correct. This would be the Marvel Knights version. Daredevil is the Max, like Netflix Daredevil was the Max version, and
Yes.
the the other shows would be the regular newsstand version. So
There you go. I think we've got it. We went down a rabbit hole, but I think we got it. I think we got there.
Right.
Well, I think we've got all of our discussion topics covered for this week. That's going to wrap it up for our review of episodes 1 and 2 of Daredevil Born Again. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. We'd love it if you'd stick around as we continue our journey through these episodes of the TV show and then continue back on our weekly trek through the comics. So please, if you haven't subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as it's released. We're going to be releasing these episodes for the TV show every Friday, and we are going to be suspending the look in the comics for the duration of the TV series, just so that we can get these to you, because we have to turn them around really quickly and then get them out to you. And it'll just make things a little bit easier. But we will get back to the comic book discussion and the history discussion, though. There's plenty of time for those, because those are from like 20 years ago. So consider it time for you to catch up if you've been reading along with us.
Absolutely.
If you've already subscribed to the show, we'd love it if you'd leave us a review or let other people know about the show via social media. It'll help others find the podcast. If you're new to the show or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show or your thoughts on the Daredevil episodes 1 and 2. You can send us those comments at comicsovertime.com, or you can reach out to us via social media. We're on Blue Sky at Comics Over Time there. Dan, it was a long wait. Like you said, about 7 years since the end of Daredevil season 3. We now have 2 episodes in the book. We've got 7 to go. I can't wait for Tuesday.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to talking to you and everybody else about them next week. So onward.
So until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.